Have you ever given your whole life to someone, only to find out they were secretly giving their love, money, and respect to another person? Have you ever felt invisible in your own marriage, treated like you were worth less than a stranger? In this story, you will see how one woman discovered the truth on a day that was supposed to honor her, Mother's Day. You'll learn how betrayal can come in the smallest things, like a plastic flower, and how strength can come from the cold clarity of finally saying, "Enough is enough." If you have ever faced betrayal, heartbreak, or disrespect from the one you trusted most, then this story will show you how to prepare yourself, how to protect what's yours, and how to rise again even when your world feels like it's falling apart. Because sometimes losing everything you thought you had gives you the chance to gain the life you truly deserve. As you listen, I want you to think, what would you do if this happened to you? And please, comment below the city or country you're watching from, because I want to see just how far this story of betrayal and empowerment reaches. Now let me take you to the beginning of my story. My husband gave a luxury car to his mistress, and for Mother's Day he simply gave me a $10 plastic flower. I packed my bags and sold everything in the house. When he came home, there was only a note that said, "I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Alberta, and at 64 years old, I thought I had seen the worst of what marriage could offer. I was wrong. Mother's Day morning started like any other Sunday in our house on Maple Street. The same house I had been cleaning, maintaining, and paying the mortgage on for the past 23 years. Marty was already gone when I woke up, which wasn't unusual anymore. He always had some excuse: early golf, breakfast with clients, errands that couldn't wait. I had stopped questioning his absences years ago, convincing myself that a good wife trusts her husband. I made my coffee in the kitchen that still had the same yellow wallpaper I had hung in 1998. The same cracked tile by the sink that Marty promised to fix next weekend for the past 5 years. Everything in our house had this tired, forgotten quality to it, including me. Around 10 in the morning, I heard his truck pull into the driveway. The front door slammed shut with that particular force that told me he was either irritated about something or trying to seem important. His heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway as he called out, "Alberta, where are you?" I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked to the living room, where I found him standing with something behind his back, wearing that forced smile he used when he was about to do something he thought was generous, but really wasn't. "Happy Mother's Day, honey," he said, producing a single plastic flower from behind his back. Not even a bouquet of plastic flowers. One flower, the kind you find in the clearance bin at the dollar store, with a thin green stem and petals that looked like they had been cut from a shower curtain. I stared at it, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "Thank you," I managed to say, taking the flower from his hand. The plastic was still warm from sitting in his truck, and there was a small price sticker on the stem that he hadn't bothered to remove. $10.99. "I know it's not much," he said, already reaching for his phone, "but I figured you'd appreciate something that won't die. Low maintenance, like you, like me, low maintenance. I had been married to this man for 40 years, had worked as a registered nurse for 37 of those years, had contributed to every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every grocery run, and this is what I was worth to him. A plastic flower because I was low maintenance. "I have to head out again," he continued, not even waiting for my response. "Business meeting might be late tonight." He kissed my forehead with the same enthusiasm you'd show a distant relative at a funeral, grabbed his keys, and left. The whole interaction had lasted maybe 3 minutes. I stood there holding that plastic flower, feeling something shift inside me. Not sadness exactly, something harder, something colder. I decided to make myself a proper Mother's Day brunch. I scrambled eggs the way I like them, toasted bread until it was golden, and made fresh orange juice. I set the table with our good china, the set I had bought with my own money but never used because Marty said it was too fancy for every day. Well, today wasn't every day. As I ate, I opened my phone to check Facebook, something I rarely did anymore because it always made me feel worse about my life. But today, something drew me to it. Maybe curiosity, maybe intuition. The first thing I saw made my fork freeze halfway to my mouth. There, at the top of my feed, was a photo posted by Meadow Collins. I knew who she was. She worked at the bank where Marty had his business account. 28 years old, blonde, the kind of confident pretty that came from never having to worry about money or aging. She was standing next to a brand new white Mercedes convertible, keys dangling from her manicured fingers, her face glowing with excitement. The caption read, "Best Mother's Day surprise ever. Thank you to my special someone for making me feel so loved and appreciated." Some men really know how to treat a woman right. I stared at that screen until my eyes watered. The timestamp showed the photo had been posted an hour ago. 1 hour after my husband had given me a $10 plastic flower and told me I was low maintenance, my hands started shaking as I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of them. Her friends congratulating her, asking who the mystery man was, commenting on how lucky she was. One comment in particular made my stomach turn. "Girl, you better marry him. A man who gives you a Mercedes for Mother's Day when you don't even have kids yet. That's husband material right there." She didn't even have children. This woman was getting a luxury car on Mother's Day when she wasn't even a mother. While I, who had raised 2 stepchildren that barely spoke to me anymore, got a plastic flower. I set my phone down and looked at that ridiculous flower sitting on my table next to my good china. The contrast was almost laughable. Almost. I finished my eggs, washed my dishes, and put away the good china. Then I went to my computer and did something I hadn't done in months. I checked our bank statements. What I found there made the plastic flower seem like a gentle slap compared to a sledgehammer blow. In the past 6 months, there had been payments to Mercedes-Benz of Beverly Hills, payments to high-end restaurants I had never been to, payments to Victoria's Secret, Nordstrom, and a jewelry store downtown, all of them on dates when Marty had told me he was working late or meeting clients. The Mercedes payment alone was more than I made in 3 months as a nurse. I sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not heartbreak, not even anger exactly. It was clarity, crystal clear, ice-cold clarity. For 40 years, I had been living with a man who saw me as low maintenance. A man who thought I deserved a plastic flower while he gave his mistress a car that cost more than most people's annual salary. A man who had been spending our money, my money, on another woman while I wore the same clothes for years and ate generic cereal to save on groceries. The phone rang. It was my sister calling to wish me Happy Mother's Day. I let it go to voicemail. I had more important things to do. I had a marriage to end, and I was going to do it right. I walked back to the kitchen and picked up that plastic flower. For the first time all day, I smiled. This worthless piece of plastic was going to be the most expensive gift Marty had ever given anyone. He just didn't know it yet. The plastic flower sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days, a constant reminder of what my marriage had become. Every time I walked past it, I felt that same cold clarity settling deeper into my bones. Marty barely noticed I had kept it there. He barely noticed me at all anymore. On Wednesday morning, after he left for another one of his mysterious business meetings, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at my computer with a determination I hadn't felt in years. If I was going to destroy my marriage, I needed to understand exactly what I was destroying. I started with our joint checking account, the one I had been faithfully depositing my nursing paychecks into for decades. What I found made my stomach clench with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The Mercedes payment wasn't a one-time thing. There had been monthly payments for the past 6 months, each one for $873. I did the math. Over $5,000 so far, with 2 years left on the loan for a car I had never seen, never ridden in, never even known existed until I saw it gleaming in Meadow's Facebook photos. But that was just the beginning. I found payments to Sunset Tower Apartments, the luxury complex downtown, $1,500 a month. I called them, pretending to be interested in renting, and learned that was the cost of their premium 1-bedroom units with city views and valet parking, Victoria's Secret charges, Nordstrom charges, Saks Fifth Avenue, a jewelry store on Rodeo Drive where a single purchase had cost $3,000, restaurants I could never afford, spas I had only dreamed of visiting, and a weekend trip to Napa Valley that cost more than my annual clothing budget. Every single charge was on a day when Marty had told me he was working. Every single purchase was something that would never benefit me. I pulled up Meadows' social media accounts feeling like a detective building a case. And that's exactly what I was doing, wasn't it? Building a case against my own husband. Her Instagram was a catalog of the life I had been paying for without knowing it. Designer handbags that cost more than my monthly salary, wine tastings in Napa, weekend trips to Santa Barbara, diamond earrings that caught the light in carefully posed selfies, and always cryptic captions about her generous benefactor and how some women just know how to be appreciated. The woman was living like a queen on my nurse's salary and Marty's declining contracting income. No, not just living like a queen, living better than I had ever lived, even in my own home. I found photos of dinner dates at restaurants where the wine alone cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. I found pictures of her wearing jewelry I recognized from the charges on our credit card statements. I found a photo of her in a silk dress with the tag from Nordstrom still visible in the corner of the image. She was flaunting it, not just the lifestyle, but the fact that she was taking it from a married man. In one photo, she was wearing what looked like a wedding band on her right hand instead of her left, with a caption that read, "Sometimes the best marriages aren't the legal ones." I had to stop looking before I put my fist through the computer screen. That afternoon, I called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. I needed time to think, to plan, and most importantly, to understand exactly what assets I was working with. I drove to the bank, the same bank where Meadow worked, and asked to speak with someone about our accounts. The manager, a kind woman named Susan who had known me for years, pulled up all our information on her computer. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I see you're here about your accounts. Is everything all right?" I had known Susan since she was a teller, had watched her work her way up to management, had always been friendly with her, but now I could see something in her eyes that looked like pity, and I realized she knew. She knew about Marty, and Meadow probably had known for months. "I need to understand what assets are in my name," I said quietly, "and what debts might be in my name that I don't know about." Susan's expression softened. She glanced around the bank, then leaned forward slightly. "Alberta, honey, is there something specific you're concerned about?" "I'm concerned about everything." I said, "I need a complete picture of our financial situation. Everything that's in my name, everything that's in both our names, and anything that might affect me legally." Susan nodded and began pulling up documents on her screen. What she showed me was better than I had dared to hope. The house was in both our names, but I had made the down payment with money from my inheritance when my mother died. I had documentation of that. Our joint checking account received my direct deposits, but Marty's business account was separate and apparently hemorrhaging money faster than he was making it. Most importantly, the credit cards he had been using to fund Meadows' lifestyle were in his name only. He had never put me on those accounts, probably to hide the spending from me, which meant I wasn't legally responsible for those debts. "Susan," I said, "hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to separate their finances from their spouse, what would be the best way to do that?" Susan was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a business card from her desk drawer. "This is my divorce attorney," she said softly. "She's very good at protecting women's assets during separations. Very discreet, too." I took the card and slipped it into my purse. "Thank you, Alberta," Susan said as I stood to leave. "I hope you know that you deserve better than this. You've always been one of the kindest people who come in here, and you work so hard." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of recognition. After 40 years, someone was finally seeing me clearly. That evening, Marty came home with flowers. Real flowers this time. A dozen red roses that probably cost $40. "What's the occasion?" I asked, though I already knew. Guilt. He was feeling guilty about something. Probably about spending the day with Meadow instead of at the construction site where he claimed to be working. "Can a man buy his wife flowers?" he said, kissing my cheek. "You've seemed a little down lately. Thought these might cheer you up." I looked at those roses. beautiful and expensive and meaningless. And I thought about the plastic flower still sitting on my kitchen counter. The plastic flower that had cost him $11 and was going to cost him everything else. "They're lovely," I said. "Thank you." That night, as Marty snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and making plans. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was strategic, and for the first time in decades, I was thinking about my own future. Instead of trying to save someone else's, the plastic flower had shown me who I really was to my husband. Now I was going to show him who he really was to me. The attorney's office was nothing like I had expected. Instead of intimidating mahogany and leather, Patricia Hernandez had decorated her space with warm colors and comfortable chairs. She was younger than me, maybe 50, with kind eyes and the sort of confident handshake that told me she had helped a lot of women like me. "Susan at the bank spoke very highly of you," Patricia said as we settled into her office. She said, "You needed some guidance on protecting your assets." I had practiced this conversation in my head for days, but sitting there in that chair, I felt suddenly small and foolish. "I think my husband is having an affair," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know he's spending our money on another woman, and I want to make sure I don't lose everything when I leave him." Patricia nodded without judgment, pulling out a legal pad. "Tell me about your situation, Alberta. Take your time." So I did. I told her about the plastic flower and the Mercedes. I told her about 40 years of marriage to a man who had gradually stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a convenience. I told her about working as a nurse while he ran a construction business that barely broke even, about the money I had inherited from my mother that had gone into our house, about the retirement account I had been building for decades. Patricia took notes as I talked, occasionally asking questions about documentation and timelines. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Alberta, I'm going to be honest with you. You're in a better position than you think, but only if we move carefully and strategically." She opened a folder and began explaining what she called my asset protection strategy. The house, which was in both our names, had been purchased primarily with my inheritance money. I had the documentation to prove it. My retirement account from the hospital was mine alone, built up over 37 years of nursing. The joint checking account could be problematic, but since most of the questionable spending had been done with credit cards in Marty's name only, I could argue that I had no knowledge of those expenses. "The key," Patricia said, "is that we need to establish a clear paper trail showing that you were unaware of your husband's extramarital spending. We also need to document everything before you make any moves." She handed me a list of tasks: gather bank statements from the past 2 years, print out credit card bills, take photographs of all major assets in the house. Most importantly, document Marty's schedule and whereabouts to establish a pattern of deception. "How long do I have?" I asked. "As long as you need," Patricia said. "The stronger our documentation, the better your outcome. But Alberta, I need you to understand something. This process might reveal things about your marriage that are painful to face. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the plastic flower sitting on my kitchen counter. I'm already facing them. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I kept a detailed log of when Marty left the house and when he returned, noting what excuses he gave and cross-referencing them with charges on his credit cards. The pattern was damning. Every business meeting correlated with expenses at restaurants or hotels. Every overtime job coincided with charges at jewelry stores or clothing boutiques. I discovered that he had been telling Meadow he was separated from me, living in the same house only for financial convenience. I found this out by calling one of the restaurants where his credit card had been used and asking if they remembered the couple who had dined there on a specific date. The hostess, probably thinking I was planning a romantic surprise, told me all about the lovely young woman who had been there with an older gentleman, how she had mentioned to the staff that her boyfriend was finally getting divorced from his estranged wife. Estranged wife. I had been making his breakfast every morning, doing his laundry, keeping his house, and I was the arranged wife. The most devastating discovery came when I found a second cell phone hidden in his truck. I had gone out to get something from the glove compartment, and there it was tucked under the driver's seat. The text messages on that phone revealed everything. Marty wasn't just having an affair. He was living a complete double life. To Meadow, he was a successful businessman going through an amicable divorce from a woman who didn't understand him. He had told her that I was cold, unaffair, and only interested in his money. He had painted himself as the victim of a loveless marriage to a woman who had let herself go and no longer cared about romance. The irony was breathtaking. He was spending my money to impress a woman by complaining about my supposed greed. But the text messages also revealed something else. Marty was promises to Meadow that he couldn't keep. He had told her he would buy her a house. He had promised her a trip to Europe. He had even suggested they could get married as soon as his divorce was final, and he could liquidate his assets, my assets. He was planning to divorce me and use my retirement money, my inheritance, everything I had worked for, to build a new life with a woman who was younger than his own daughter. I photographed every message, every email, every piece of evidence. Patricia had been right about one thing. The process was revealing painful truths, but it was also revealing something else. Marty wasn't just unfaithful. He was stupid. He had created a paper trail that would destroy him in any divorce proceeding. He had made promises to his mistress that would demonstrate his intent to defraud me of marital assets. He had documented his own deception so thoroughly that Patricia said it was one of the strongest cases she had ever seen. Most cheating spouses try to hide their affairs, she told me during one of our meetings. Your husband has been practically advertising his. It's almost like he wanted to get caught. Maybe he did want to get caught. Maybe after 40 years he was too much of a coward to ask for a divorce directly, so he was forcing me to do it for him. Well, I was happy to oblige, but it was going to cost him more than he had bargained for. The final piece of my strategy came from an unexpected source. During one of my regular nursing shifts, I was caring for an elderly patient whose daughter was visiting. The daughter, a woman about my age, mentioned that she was a real estate appraiser. I'm going through a divorce. I found myself saying, my attorney says I need to get our house appraised, but I don't want my husband to know about it yet. The woman, whose name was Carol, looked at me with understanding. Drive-by appraisal. She said, I can give you a preliminary assessment based on comparable sales in your neighborhood and the public records about your home's square footage and features. It won't hold up in court, but it'll give you a ballpark figure for planning purposes. 2 days later, Carol called me with numbers that made my hands shake. Our house, which we had bought for $90,000 23 years ago, was now worth over $400,000, and since I could prove that my inheritance had provided the down payment and that my income had contributed to most of the mortgage payments, I was entitled to far more than half. That night, I sat in my kitchen with Patricia's paperwork spread across the table, looking at that plastic flower and feeling something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. Not the petty power of small revenge, but the real power that comes from having options. Marty walked in from another late business meeting, smelling like expensive perfume and wine. How was your day, honey? He asked, kissing the top of my head with the same casual affection he might show a pet. Very productive, I said. Very productive indeed. He didn't notice the papers I quickly gathered up and slipped into a folder. He didn't notice the new steel in my voice. He didn't notice anything at all, which was exactly what I was counting on. The plastic flower caught the light from the overhead fixture, its fake petals gleaming like a promise. Soon, very soon, Marty was going to learn that the most expensive gifts are sometimes the ones that seem worthless at first glance. 3 months of careful planning had led to this moment. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying lipstick with steady hands, preparing for the performance of my life. Tonight, I was going to be the wife Marty remembered from 40 years ago. Tonight, I was going to give him exactly what he thought he wanted. The dining room looked like something from a magazine. I had used our wedding china, the set we hadn't touched in over a decade. Candles flickered on the table, casting warm light over the flowers I had bought that afternoon. Real flowers, not plastic ones. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent the day cooking all of Marty's favorite foods: pot roast with the mushroom gravy he loved, mashed potatoes made from scratch, the green bean casserole his mother used to make. The whole house smelled like comfort and nostalgia, exactly what I wanted. When Marty walked through the door at 6:30, I could see the confusion on his face. For the past 3 months, I had been distant but not confrontational, going through the motions of our marriage while secretly building my case. Tonight's transformation would catch him completely off guard. "What's all this?" he asked, loosening his tie as he took in the fancy table setting and the smell of home cooking. "I've been thinking," I said, walking over to help him with his jacket. "About us, about our marriage. I feel like we've been drifting apart, and I don't want that." I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. After 40 years, I could read his expressions like a well-worn book. "Alberta, you didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said. But I could tell he was pleased. Marty had always been susceptible to flattery and attention. "I wanted to," I said, leading him to the table. "I want us to reconnect. I've been thinking about how much we've both changed over the years, and maybe we need to make some changes to protect what we've built together." During dinner, I played the role perfectly. I laughed at his stories, asked about his work, complimented him on his business acumen. I told him how much I appreciated everything he did for us, how grateful I was for the security he provided. Every word was calculated to feed his ego and lower his guard. "You know," I said over dessert, "I've been worried about our financial security. With all the market volatility lately, maybe we should review our insurance policies. Make sure everything is properly protected." Marty nodded, cutting into his slice of apple pie. "That's smart thinking, Alberta. I've been meaning to update some of that paperwork anyway. I actually already contacted our insurance agent," I said casually. "He's sending over some documents for us to review, just routine updates to make sure all our assets are properly covered." This was the moment everything hinged on. The documents Patricia had prepared weren't insurance papers at all. They were legal forms that would transfer ownership of several key assets directly to me, including Marty's share of the house and his rights to my retirement account. But they were buried in pages of legitimate-looking insurance paperwork disguised in legal language that would make them nearly impossible to spot unless you were looking for them. "That sounds good," Marty said, completely focused on his pie. "Just put them on my desk when they arrive. I'll sign whatever needs signing." I had been counting on exactly that response. In 40 years of marriage, Marty had never read a legal document thoroughly. He always assumed that if I put something in front of him, it was in his best interest. His trust in my harmlessness was about to cost him everything. After dinner, we moved to the living room where I poured him his favorite bourbon and settled beside him on the couch. I hadn't sat this close to him in months, and I could smell Meadows' perfume still clinging to his clothes, even though he had obviously tried to cover it with cologne. "Marty," I said, taking his hand, "I want you to know that I understand we're not the same people we were when we got married. We've both grown and changed, and maybe we've made some choices that weren't ideal." I watched his face carefully as I spoke. He was listening, but I could see his mind working, probably wondering if I knew something, or if this was just general marital reflection. "What I mean is," I continued, "I know I haven't been the most attentive wife lately. I've been so focused on work and my own concerns that maybe I haven't been paying enough attention to your needs." This was the opening he had been waiting for. I could see relief flood his features as he realized I was taking responsibility for the problems in our marriage. "Alberta, we've both made mistakes," he said, his voice taking on that gentle, patronizing tone he used when he thought he was being magnanimous. "Marriage is hard work. It takes two people committed to making it work." "Exactly." I said, "That's why I think we should make a fresh start, clear the slate, protect what we've built, and move forward together." The documents arrived by courier the next morning, just as I had arranged. I set them on Marty's desk with a note explaining that they were the insurance updates we had discussed, and that our agent needed them signed and returned within 48 hours. I went to work as usual, spending my shift caring for patients, and counting down the hours until I could check whether Marty had taken the bait. When I arrived home that evening, the signed documents were sitting on the kitchen counter exactly where I had hoped to find them. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the pages, checking each signature. They were all there. Marty's confident scrawl on every line that mattered, transferring ownership, relinquishing claims, signing away rights he didn't even realize he had possessed. Patricia had explained that the documents were entirely legal. I wasn't forging anything or tricking him into signing something fraudulent. I was simply presenting him with paperwork that he should have read but chose not to. His failure to understand what he was signing didn't invalidate the contracts. The law assumes that adults read documents before they sign them. Patricia had told me if he signs papers transferring ownership of assets to you, those transfers are legally binding, regardless of whether he understood what he was doing. That night, Marty came home with more flowers and a bottle of wine. I signed those insurance papers, he said, kissing my cheek. Seems like pretty standard stuff. Good thinking to get that updated. Thank you, honey, I said, accepting the flowers with a smile that felt more genuine than any expression I had worn in months. I feel so much more secure knowing everything is properly protected. Over the following weeks, I continued playing the role of the renewed wife. I cooked his favorite meals, showed interest in his work, and even suggested we plan a vacation together. Marty responded exactly as I had predicted, becoming more affectionate and attentive, probably relieved that his guilty conscience was getting a reprieve. He had no idea that the woman cooking his breakfast and ironing his shirts had just legally acquired ownership of almost everything he thought he possessed. He had no idea that his attempt to prepare for divorce by hiding assets had backfired spectacularly. He had no idea that the wife he had dismissed as low maintenance had been anything but. I kept that plastic flower on the kitchen counter throughout this entire period, a constant reminder of what had started this chain of events. Every morning when Marty left for his business meetings with Meadow, every evening when he came home smelling like her perfume and telling me lies about his day, I looked at that flower and felt the satisfaction of knowing that his betrayal was funding his own destruction. The final piece of my plan was already in motion. I had given my notice at the hospital, telling them I needed to take an extended leave for family reasons. I had been quietly moving my personal belongings out of the house, a few items at a time, storing them at a facility across town. I had opened a new bank account in my name only, transferred my retirement funds, and changed the direct deposit for my final paychecks. Marty noticed none of this. He was too busy spending money he no longer legally possessed on a woman who had no idea her sugar daddy was about to become a very expensive liability. The trap was set. All that remained was springing it. The morning Marty left for his weekend trip to Napa Valley with Meadow was the morning I had been planning for 4 months. He stood in our bedroom, packing his expensive luggage with clothes I had washed and ironed, completely oblivious to the fact that he was walking into the destruction of his entire life. "It's a construction conference," he said, not even bothering to look at me as he folded shirts into his suitcase. "Big clients will be there. Could be some important networking opportunities." I nodded from my position by the dresser, watching him pack silk ties and cologne for his supposed business conference. "That sounds wonderful, honey. I hope it goes well for you." The lie came so easily to him now that I wondered if he even remembered what the truth felt like. According to his credit card statements, he had booked a romantic weekend at a vineyard resort, complete with couples massage appointments and dinner reservations at restaurants that didn't allow business meetings. "I'll probably be back late Sunday night," he said, zipping up his bag. "Don't wait up for me." "I won't," I said. And for the first time in months, I meant something exactly the way it sounded, after his truck disappeared down our street. I stood in the sudden silence of our house and felt a calm I hadn't experienced in decades. Today was the day I would stop being a victim and start being something far more dangerous to men like Marty. Today I would become a woman who refused to be dismissed. I started in the bedroom, working systematically through every drawer, every closet, every space that contained something of value. The jewelry box held pieces I had inherited from my mother. items Marty had probably forgotten I owned, but that were worth more than his truck. My grandmother's diamond engagement ring worth at least $15,000 according to the appraisal I had gotten months earlier, pearl necklaces that had been in my family for generations, a watch my father had given me when I graduated nursing school. All of it went into carefully labeled boxes that I loaded into my car. The furniture was next. Not all of it, just the pieces that mattered. The antique dining room set I had bought with my own money 5 years ago when Marty said we couldn't afford to replace our old table. The grandfather clock that had belonged to my parents. The piano I had played as a child, which my mother had left to me when she died. I had arranged for a moving company to help me, telling them I was relocating some furniture to a storage unit. They arrived at noon. 3 professional movers who efficiently loaded my selected items into their truck without asking questions about why I was only taking certain pieces and leaving others behind. By 3, the house looked subtly different, but not obviously emptied. Marty would notice eventually, but not immediately. That was exactly what I wanted. The final step was the one I had been both dreading and anticipating for months. I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote the letter that would end 40 years of marriage. The words came more easily than I had expected, maybe because I had been rehearsing them in my head for so long, or maybe because the truth always knows how to speak for itself. Marty, I began, by the time you read this, I will be gone from your life permanently. I know about Meadow. I know about the Mercedes, the apartment, the jewelry, the trips, and all the other ways you have been spending our money on your mistress while giving me plastic flowers and telling me I should be grateful for your low-maintenance approach to our marriage. I know you told her you were separated from me. I know you painted me as a cold, greedy wife who didn't understand you. I know you promised her a house, a trip to Europe, and a marriage funded by the assets you plan to take from me in a divorce. What you don't know is that for the past 4 months I have been documenting every lie you told, every dollar you spent, and every promise you made to her using money that was legally mine. What you also don't know is that 3 months ago you signed papers transferring ownership of this house entirely to me. You signed papers relinquishing any claim to my retirement account. You signed papers that make you legally responsible for all the debts you incurred during your affair, while protecting me from any financial liability for your choices. You thought you were signing insurance papers because you never bothered to read anything I put in front of you. You trusted me to handle the boring details of our life while you focused on the exciting details of your other life. That trust is going to cost you more than you can possibly imagine. I am keeping the house. I am keeping my retirement money. I am keeping everything I brought into this marriage and everything I earned during this marriage. You are keeping the credit card debt from your affair, the loan on Meadow's Mercedes, and the lease on her apartment. I have filed for legal separation, and my attorney has all the documentation she needs to ensure that you will not be able to claim any portion of my assets. The evidence of your adultery and financial deception is comprehensive and undeniable. I am not doing this because I am vindictive. I am doing this because I finally understand that I deserve better than a man who sees me as low maintenance while treating his mistress as high priority. I deserve better than someone who thinks a plastic flower is sufficient appreciation for a woman who spent 40 years building a life he was secretly planning to give away to someone else. By the way, I've left your plastic flower in the center of the kitchen table. It's the only thing in this house that truly represents what our marriage meant to you. So I thought you should keep it. Don't try to contact me. Don't try to find me. Don't try to convince me that this is all a misunderstanding or that you can change. I trusted you for 40 years and you used that trust to fund a relationship with another woman. There is no coming back from that. I hope Meadow is worth it, Marty, because she's all you have left, Alberta. I folded the letter carefully and placed it on the kitchen table right next to that plastic flower. The symbolism was perfect, the worthless gift that had opened my eyes to his betrayal, sitting next to the words that would close the door on our marriage forever. I looked around the house one last time. This place that had been my home for 23 years, but had never really been mine. The walls held 40 years of memories, but most of them felt like they belonged to someone else. Now the woman who had lived here, who had accepted crumbs and called them love, who had worked her fingers to the bone while her husband spent her earnings on another woman, that woman was gone. I picked up my purse and my final box of personal items and walked out the front door. I didn't lock it behind me. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. My new apartment was small but bright with windows that faced east toward the sunrise. I had signed the lease 2 weeks earlier using money from the sale of some jewelry pieces I hadn't wanted to keep. It wasn't much, but it was mine in a way that house had never been. As I unpacked my boxes in my new living room, my phone rang. It was Susan from the bank. "Alberta," she said, "I wanted you to know that there was some unusual activity on one of the accounts today. Someone tried to access the home equity line of credit, but it was declined because the ownership papers show only your name now." I smiled, settling into my new chair by the window. "Thank you for letting me know, Susan." Also, she continued, "There were some large charges on Mr. Patterson's personal credit cards today. I thought you should be aware in case they affect any of your legal proceedings." Marty was spending money he didn't have, probably trying to impress Meadow during their romantic weekend, completely unaware that his financial world was about to collapse around him. "I appreciate the information," I said. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it while watching the sunset from my new kitchen window. Somewhere across town, Marty was probably toasting his future with expensive wine, telling Meadow about the house they would soon share and the life they would build together with money that no longer existed. Tomorrow, he would drive home to find my letter and an empty house. He would call his credit card companies and discover that his accounts were maxed out. He would try to access our joint accounts and learn that they had been legally transferred to me. He would contact a lawyer and be told that the papers he had signed were binding and that his adultery had eliminated any claim to spousal support. But tonight, for the first time in 40 years, I went to sleep in a bed that belonged entirely to me. In a home where no one could take me for granted, planning a future that no one else could steal. The plastic flower was Marty's problem now. 6 months later, I was arranging fresh tulips in a vase when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia's office number, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever the legal aspects of my new life demanded attention. "Alberta." Patricia's voice was warm but businesslike. "I have some updates on the final settlement that I think you'll want to hear." I settled into my favorite chair by the window, looking out at the small garden I had planted in the courtyard of my apartment complex. "Good news or bad news?" "Definitely good news," she said. "The house sale closed yesterday. After paying off the remaining mortgage and legal fees, you'll net just over $300,000. And Marty's attorney has confirmed that he's dropping all claims to your retirement account." I had put the house on the market 3 months earlier, not because I needed the money, but because I couldn't bear the thought of Marty driving by it every day, plotting ways to get it back. Better to start completely fresh than to spend years looking over my shoulder. "What about his financial situation?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "It's not pretty, Alberta. The credit card companies have been aggressive about collecting on the debt from his affair. He had to declare bankruptcy last month, and apparently his relationship with the woman didn't survive the financial pressure. I should have felt satisfaction hearing that Marty and Meadow had broken up, but instead I felt something closer to pity. Not for him, but for both of us. 40 years of marriage, and it had all come down to this: lawyers and bank statements and the cold mathematics of dividing a life. "Thank you for everything, Patricia." I said, "I know this case wasn't the most exciting you've ever handled, but you saved my future." "Alberta," Patricia said, "can I tell you something? In 20 years of family law, I've never seen anyone handle divorce proceedings with as much dignity as you did. You never let anger make your decisions for you. You just quietly took back what was yours." After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking about dignity and anger, and the strange ways life teaches us who we really are. A year ago, I had been a woman who accepted plastic flowers and called it love. Today, I was a woman who owned her own home, controlled her own finances, and answered to no one but herself. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been nights when I questioned everything, when the loneliness felt like it might swallow me whole. There had been moments when I wondered if 40 years of familiarity, even bad familiarity, might be better than the uncertainty of starting over at 64. But those moments passed, usually when I was doing something I had never been free to do before, like taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings or sleeping until 9 on Saturdays, or eating ice cream for dinner without anyone commenting on my choices. I had learned to like my own company in ways I never expected. I read books that interested me instead of watching television shows that bored me. I decorated my apartment with colors I loved instead of neutral tones that offended no one. I bought groceries based on what I wanted to eat, not what someone else expected to find in the refrigerator. The strangest part was how little I missed Marty himself. I missed the idea of him, the concept of having a partner, but I didn't miss his actual presence in my daily life. I didn't miss walking on eggshells around his moods or pretending to be interested in his stories about construction jobs or lying awake listening to him snore while wondering if he was dreaming about another woman. 3 weeks later, I was grocery shopping when I saw them. Marty was in the checkout line ahead of me, looking older and smaller than I remembered. Next to him stood a woman I didn't recognize, someone closer to his age with tired eyes and discount store clothing. His new girlfriend, I assumed, someone whose expectations were probably more in line with what he could actually provide. He looked up and saw me just as the cashier finished scanning his items. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped toward me, leaving his companion by the register. "Alberta," he said, his voice uncertain. "You look good." I did look good, I knew that. I had lost weight, not from stress but from eating better and taking walks every evening. I had gotten my hair cut in a style that actually flattered my face instead of the practical bob I had worn for 20 years. I was wearing a dress I had bought simply because I liked the color, not because it was appropriate for someone my age. "Hello, Marty," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He started, then stopped, glancing back at his companion who was watching us with obvious curiosity. "I wanted to say that I'm sorry about how things ended, about the way I treated you." I looked at this man who had shared my life for 4 decades, who had given me a plastic flower while buying his mistress a Mercedes, who had been prepared to steal my retirement money to fund a new life with a younger woman. He looked genuinely remorseful, but remorse and regret aren't the same thing. He was sorry he had been caught, sorry his plan had backfired, sorry he was facing consequences, but I doubted he was sorry for the years of lies and betrayal that had led to this moment. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "I hope you've learned something from all this." He nodded eagerly, probably hoping I was about to offer forgiveness or reconciliation. "I have. I really have, Alberta. I know I don't deserve it, but do you think we could maybe have coffee sometime just to talk?" I looked at him standing there in his wrinkled shirt and worn shoes, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, but something much more powerful. Indifference. Complete and total indifference to his opinion of me, his desires for the future, his need for absolution. "No, Marty," I said, "I don't think that would be a good idea." His face fell and I could see him struggling to find words that might change my mind. But there weren't any words that could do that, because I wasn't the same woman who had once cared desperately about making him happy. "I should go," I said, pushing my cart toward a different checkout line. "Take care of yourself." I didn't look back as I walked away, but I could feel him watching me. Let him watch. Let him see what a woman looked like when she finally understood her own worth. That evening, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea and thought about plastic flowers. That ridiculous gift had been the catalyst for everything that followed, but it hadn't created the problems in my marriage. It had just finally made them impossible to ignore. I wondered sometimes what would have happened if Marty had given me real flowers that Mother's Day or no flowers at all. Would I have continued living in willful blindness for another 10 years? Would I have died without ever knowing what it felt like to live for myself instead of for someone else's convenience? The plastic flower was probably still sitting in some landfill somewhere, a piece of fake beauty that would outlast most real flowers, but would never bring anyone genuine joy. It was a perfect metaphor for the marriage I had left behind. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister asking if I wanted to join her for a weekend trip to the coast. I typed back a quick yes and smiled. A year ago, I would have had to ask Marty's permission for such a trip. Would have had to arrange his meals and make sure he had clean clothes and remind him to pay bills while I was gone. Now, I could say yes to whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, for whatever reason I wanted. I could take weekend trips or pottery classes, or long walks or afternoon naps. I could eat ice cream for dinner and sleep until 9 and read books that Marty would have called boring. I could be Alberta instead of someone's wife, someone's caretaker, someone's afterthought. As the sun set over my small but perfect garden, I raised my teacup in a silent toast to plastic flowers that reveal the truth, to lawyers who fight for women's dignity, to bank accounts in your own name and apartments that smell like your own choices, and most of all to the discovery that sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to leave behind anything that makes you feel small. At 64, I was finally learning what it meant to bloom. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you.